every once in a while, we get an RPG that's just so immersive that it lives on for years to come. Whether it be for its player agency, its lore, its combat, its narrative, the world itself, or its characters. It's the type of game that you want to invest your time in. And Obsidian Entertainment is no stranger to RPG fans. Whether that's Fallout New Vegas, Pillars of Eternity, The Outer Worlds, or even Neverwinter, they have a long pedigree of some of the greatest RPGs of all time. So to see that expectations are high for possibly their biggest game ever set in the same universe as Pillars of Eternity is to be expected. The only question is did they pull off yet another masterful RPG? Well, to that, I'd say even though Avowed isn't perfect per se, I think in a lot of ways it lived up to its expectation, and we're going to get into all of that in today's review. Now, first, I do want to thank Xbox and the Avowed team for sending me a review code. I was actually a little bit surprised that they popped up in my email asking me if I'd like to review it. And yeah, I was like, definitely. Let me check this game out now, because I've been looking forward to this game for quite some time. But I do want to reassure you all that this has zero, and I mean absolutely zero impact on my opinions. And I think that should become very clear based on the first thing that we're going to talk about. Before we even talk about Avowed's gameplay and its story, I think we first need to talk about the elephant in the room, the controversy that surrounds Obsidian and their hiring practices leading up to its release. This is a sensitive topic that I predict a lot of reviewers will simply skip over, but that's not how I like to do things on this channel. I feel like my job is to describe to you, the consumer, what you're going to get out of this game, and then let you, the consumer, make the choice in whether or not you want to play it. So as a reviewer, I feel like it's my duty to give you any type of information that you might find important. And in this case, there are a lot of people that finds this information to be important. Now, whether or not you fall into this specific category, that's completely up to you. I'm not telling you if this is a good thing or if it's a bad thing. It really just depends on your own personal point of view. Of course, though, I'm talking about whether or not Avowed was built for the quote-unquote modern audience. These type of games have built a reputation for being overly preachy at the detriment of their characters and their stories. And what I'll say to that is that while Avowed, yes, has some of the tropes that you would expect for these type of games, its writing, however, is generally of high quality. The main characters are very likable, and the story is compelling and very well written. I mean, if you've played any Obsidian game prior, it still has everything that you'd want and more. And that takes me to the meat and potatoes of this review. The thing that Obsidian has always excelled at is in their writing and how they implement that into its player agency. You're going to make a lot of decisions that impacts the story in a meaningful way. And they once again perfected that in Avowed. In Avowed, you play as a godlike, which is a being that was born touched by a god. It's a rare occurrence that not only grants them special abilities, but it also instills an exotic appearance on them that will make them easily recognizable. So it can also be viewed as a curse, and a lot of the conversations that you have with NPCs, you'll easily notice that they're a little bit weary of your nature. And that's where the player agency comes in. You are this character, and you can make this character into anything that you want it to be. You can be stoic, you can be a savior, you can be a destroyer, or any other persona that you want. It's completely up to you and how you want to convey this character and what kind of mark you want to leave on its world. Now, you've also been given an important task because you've been given the task to research a plague-like illness that's ravaging the living lands. This so-called disease is turning creatures and people into just raging monstrosities, and your decisions will impact the entire world and its inhabitants. It's a compelling mystery that really keeps you moving forward. Now, you're going to get mixed up into a lot of other turmoil as you meet new characters and just add new companions to your party. And that's another thing that I really enjoyed about Avowed. The companions that join your party are very likable. Even the most pessimistic character will eventually win you over once you dive into their backstory. So your companions are charming and they're endearing, and they bring life to its already compelling story. I really enjoy their conversations and even their conversations between each other when you rest at one of the many camps that you can find throughout your playthrough. Now, these camps are a place where you can kind of kick back and relax, talk to your companions, learn a little bit more about them, but you can also upgrade equipment and armor here. So this is a very important, relaxed spot that you're going to repeatedly visit throughout your playthrough. Now, since we're talking about a story, one thing that I do want to touch up on is the Pillars of Eternity universe. Even though Avowed is set in the same universe and there are nods to those games, you, however, do not need to play those games to enjoy Avowed. You can jump in right away and enjoy its story, no problem. Its good story, though, would mean absolutely nothing if the game itself was not good. And for the most part, I'm happy to say that I enjoyed its offering. Now, there are some caveats, which I'm going to get into here in a moment, but the world itself is one of the best that I've seen in a very long time. Prior to its release, we were led to believe that Avowed has a smaller scale world, much like their previous game, The Outer Worlds. So I was a little bit surprised to find that it's a lot larger than I expected. Technically, it's not an open world in the sense that there's no load screens, but instead it's split up into several large-scale zones with various biomes. And these zones are quite expansive. I mean, they feel as if they're open-world games at times. Exploration is one of its main attractions, and you can easily absorb yourself into its immersive environments because some of these places are just downright beautiful. However, one thing that I was a little bit underwhelmed about is that even though the world itself is interesting, for a large portion of my playthrough, I felt like there was rarely a reward that made my exploration feel worth it. Most loot seems to be crafting items rather than weapons or money, so by the end of the first zone, the little gear that I was able to scavenge was no longer up to the task. My companions kept telling me that I needed to buy new armor and new weapons, so, I listened to them only to find out that the economy in Avowed is quite pricey. Even though I'd already played Avowed for about 8 hours by this point, I only had a small fraction of what traders were actually asking for. So what I did is I then took on every bounty that I could find in the city that I was in at the time, and even after all of that, I only had enough money for a single weapon. No armor or anything like that, just a single weapon. Now, luckily, these bounties gave me a few minorly good weapons that helped me complete the next few mainline quests, but however, I was quickly outclassed yet again by the time I got to Zone 2. And this time, it was far more severe. Yet again, I had to look for a trader, only to find that the weapons have gotten even more expensive. This was a problem that I had through a large portion of the game, and this made its gameplay feel more tedious than enjoyable at times. This is probably my single biggest complaint for Avowed, and I'm curious to see if other people runs into the same issues that I did, or if there was just something that I was fundamentally missing. Was I just overlooking good items or something, or was there an easier way to make money that I just didn't know about? Either which way, though, there was times that I was just more frustrated by its grind than anything else, which kept me away from enjoying its otherwise excellent combat. And this is another strong point for Avowed. In a lot of ways, you can feel that it was inspired by games like Skyrim, but with a much more diverse combat system. You have a wide array of combat abilities that you can choose from as you level up your character. I mean, if you want to be your typical knight with a shield and a sword, you can do that. If you want to be a powerful wizard with a wand, you can do that as well. I mean, there's a ton of different weapons that ranges from guns, bows, shields, swords, and even wands. And even more here is that you can dual wield any single-handed weapon, which means you can be a dual-wielding Harry Potter with 2 wands if you want. Or if you want, you can have a shield in your left hand and a pistol in your right. You can be as creative or traditional as you want with its dual-wielding setup. So when your armor and weapons aren't underleveled, the combat in Avowed is an absolute blast. Now, a few other minor gripes that I have, though, and most of these didn't really impact my enjoyment, but I still feel like they're necessary to point out. One is that there is no repercussion for stealing in this game. I feel like for the type of game that this is somewhat immersion breaking because you can take whatever you want in front of people. If you see food on somebody's table or a sword that's in front of a store, you can just take that with zero repercussion at all. I feel like this game could have used a criminal system to lean into its player agency a little bit more. The other thing, though, is its performance. There's 3 different options to choose from: frame rate, graphics, and balance mode. Graphics is 30 FPS, balanced is 40 FPS if you have a 120 Hz display, and frame rate is your 60 FPS option, which is how I prefer to play. However, even though I played on the Xbox Series X with VRR enabled, there were times that I noticed a dip in its frame rate. For the most part, I thought it was fine, but it's not necessarily perfect either. What's more, and I believe this might be a bug, but every once in a while, individual characters will display at what appears to be 30 FPS. Characters, for whatever reason, just look very choppy at times, especially during dialogue scenes, and if this is a bug, hopefully they'll get this fixed up. Now, speaking of bugs, though, I did run into a few. Most really aren't worth talking about, but there was one that really bothered me, and that's where I had a mainline quest that would not track on my map. So, in other words, I had to find the location and the exact person that I needed to find without any kind of tracking, which took a painfully long time to find. It actually got to the point where I thought this might be a game-breaking bug for me, but luckily, that wasn't the case. Other than that, though, I thankfully didn't run into any other kind of big issue. So to sum things up here, let's go over what I liked, what I didn't like, and then I'll go over my final score. What I liked first and foremost is its player agency. They did a really good job with player choice that gives you the opportunity to engross yourself into its story with impactful, consequential decisions. It also has a beautiful world. Technically, it's not an open world per se, but it feels like it is at times, and some of its environments are creative and just beautiful all at the same time. That also leans into its exploration. Even though I felt like there should be more reward, especially for the first few zones, it, however, is a fun world to explore simply because its world is very well put together. Lastly, I liked its compelling story. It was mysterious, and thanks to your likable companions, it was a joy to unravel. Now, what I didn't like, though, was its sharp difficulty spikes. Obsidian chose not to level up enemies based on your level, which I agree with. I don't like artificial difficulty, and I do like challenging games, but in my experience, Avowed feels somewhat unbalanced, which made enemies feel like bullet sponges at times, unless I'm just completely missing something here, or if they're going to change that with a day one patch. We'll see about all that. This then leads me to its greedy economy. I do think things get better in the late game, but there were large portions of Avowed where it was both difficult to buy or to find weapons unless you enjoy grinding. Then the last thing that I didn't like was some of its bugs. Some of the characters, for whatever reason, just looked very choppy at times. And then, of course, the mainline quest that would not track. Hopefully that was just a problem that only was for me, but it is something that took a painfully long time to find. So to wrap things up here, I have somewhat mixed emotions towards Avowed. In my experience, there's a lot to like that puts it on par with other great RPGs. I love the world, I think it has a compelling story, and I like its characters. But there was also that frustration that kept me from enjoying it to its full potential. I hope that's just a problem that I personally had, and that is not a widespread issue upon release. But if it is, I hope they fix it, because Avowed has a ton of potential, to say the least. So I've battled back and forth about how I want to score this game, and I'm going to settle with an 8 out of 10. I feel like it has a lot of what makes a great RPG experience, and if they fix these things up, this could be a truly great RPG, but my personal overall enjoyment was dragged down by some of the frustrations that I described. If you play it, though, let me hear your experience in the comments below, but until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.